that others won't want to be in union with you. Conclusion star, C star, so if the atonement involves the innocent Christ voluntarily suffering the penalty your sin incurs, then you shouldn't feel any shame. C star entails that both the denial of 2 and the denial of C in the formal statement of Eleanor's argument above. The argument for C star thus threatens both to undercut and to rebut Eleanor's claim that the Anselmian can't solve the shame component of the backward-looking problem. Now, the conjunction of 1 star through 4 star strikes me as more plausible than the conjunction of 1 through 3, again in the formal statement of Eleanor's argument. While each of 1 star through 4 star is quite plausible, 2, from Eleanor's argument, again, the key claim, I think, that if the atonement involves the innocent Christ voluntarily suffering the penalty your sin incurs, then the atonement can only add to your shame. That doesn't strike me as obvious on its face, and I don't find an attempt to justify it in Eleanor's paper. She seems to treat that as a basic premise. I conclude then that we should deny both 2 and C in the formal statement of Eleanor's argument on the basis of 1 star through 4 star. Assuming that the Anselmian can also solve the guilt component of the backward-looking problem, which, remember, Eleanor hasn't questioned, we should conclude, pace Eleanor, that the Anselmian can in fact fully solve the backward-looking problem. And the bad news for the Thomist gets at least a little worse. The fact that the Anselmian can solve the shame component of the backward-looking problem entails that he can also make considerable progress on the forward-looking problem. That is, that the defect of human will, whence sin springs, makes one liable to future sin, further alienating one from oneself and others, God included. On Eleanor's description of the future-looking problem, one of its key components is present shame over past sin, writes Eleanor. One source of a person's insecurity in human relationships is the fear on his part that if others really knew him, they'd want to reject him. And I note that that's the fear with which Eleanor equates shame. If fear and insecurity get the upper hand in a psyche, they can have the added disadvantage of producing greater or lesser degrees of self-deception, one's then alienated both from oneself and from others. It's not hard to understand why a person prone to sin would be subject to anxiety and even depression. And I'll just skip down to the first line of the paragraph here. These difficulties constitute the first component in the problem of sin to which I want to call attention. We can think of that as the future-looking component of the problem. So present shame about past sin does double duty as an element of both past and, more important for present purposes, future-looking problems of human sinfulness. But this implies that the Anselmian can make progress on the future-looking problem too. Recall Eleanor's pessimism about the Anselmian's prospects for solving the future-looking problem, and this is quoting Eleanor. It seems that for the Anselmian interpretation, the forward-looking problem of human sin remains. Nothing about the atonement on such interpretations of the doctrine alters the human proneness to sin. Even if on such interpretations the atonement is efficacious to remove the penalty a human being incurs in sinning, the human proclivity to sin is not removed just by paying the debt for past sin. As Eleanor correctly suggests elsewhere in her paper, though, mitigating one's present shame over past sin makes future alienation from oneself and others less likely. Presumably, anything that makes future alienation from oneself and others, including God, less likely, thereby ameliorates one's tendency to sin. But we saw earlier that on the Anselmian theory of atonement, plus Eleanor's account of shame, atonement can mitigate present shame over past sin. Despite Eleanor's claims to the contrary, then, we should conclude that the Anselmian can A, fully solve the backward-looking problem of human sin, and B, make at least considerable progress on the future-looking problem. Accordingly, it's unclear to what, if any extent, Eleanor's relevant argumentation supports her claim that the Thomist outperforms the Anselmian on the main problem the atonement is meant to solve. Thanks.
Laura Ekstrom tells me that we have virtually no time left, and so I'm going to bag all my response to the comments except just one, which I think I can, get through in very short order. I want to say also that I'm grateful to EJ for his interesting and helpful comments. I appreciate greatly his spirited defense of the Anselmian theory of the atonement, and I can't possibly do justice to his comments in just a minute or two, but there's just one thing I do want to say. He says he takes me to be equating shame with the fear of rejection by others. But, if you think about it for a minute, you can see that if that were my theory of shame, it would really be very inadequate. And I think he's just got me mixed up on that score. What I said is a person who feels shame believes it would be appropriate for others to reject him. And without that appropriateness, of course, you aren't really going to get the heart of shame or guilt. A shamed person might very well continue to believe that it would be appropriate for others to reject him, even if he also believes that those others would actually accept him. And to see the point here real fast, just imagine that not because of a metabolic condition or circumstances in her life that excuse her, but just for no reason other than very bad eating habits and a complete failure to exercise, Paula swells up to 450 pounds. And suppose that Paula also knows that her partner Jerome is committed to her and committed to his relationship to her anyway, even so. Why suppose that Jerome's commitment to her and Paula's recognition of that commitment take away from Paula her shame over being so fat? What Paula can continue to believe even in these circumstances is that it would be entirely understandable, entirely appropriate if Jerome rejected her, even if she also knows that Jerome will not do so. Jerome's commitment to her may make Jerome admirable, but it doesn't do the same for Paula. And since Paula can see that this is so, Jerome's commitment to her just by itself is not going to take away from her shame over her obesity. So the fact that Christ is willing to unite with sinful human beings doesn't by itself take away from sinful human beings shame over being a creature of that sort. And so what I want to say at the end is it still seems to me true that in this one respect, the Anselmian interpretation doesn't do as well as the Thomistic one.
Okay, so we do only have 10 minutes, and we'll follow our practice of using the microphones for questions, but I may call on people not in the order in which you're lined up, so as to give priority to people who haven't had a chance to ask questions in previous sessions. So I'd like to invite people who are in that position to step up and start. Would you like to start?
I can make this really quickly. It's more a question, Eleanor. We've got these two problems, the problem of sin and guilt and the problem of human suffering. I'm willing to be instructed on this, but I guess I need some kind of argument why the solution to one has to be organically connected to the solution to the other. I mean, it would be nice if they were, and they are organically connected in the sense that the solutions will both come from God. But I think you want something a lot stronger than that. And I just, like I say, I'm willing to be taught on this, but I'm just not clear why it can't be the case that there's this one solution to the one problem, and there's a different, not organically connected solution to the other problem. Why do the same narrative have to solve both problems?
Well, I suppose it doesn't, but here's my thought. So you want to know why it is that the following very bad things have happened to you and God let them happen. And then people inclined in this direction, inclined to try to give some sort of explanation, will frequently enough point to some sort of good for you. That's how this discussion is going to go. Your soul-making or something of the sort. You can point to some kind of good for you. Now, presumably, whatever good for you we might point to, it's going to somehow be on the road to or converge with or somehow otherwise be connected to your ultimate good. I mean, if it was just a Porsche or something, we wouldn't understand the explanation. But if it's somehow connected in some way to what is the ultimate good for you, then presumably it ought to be connected in some way to what Christ's passion and death provide for you, since what Christ's passion and death provide for you is the ultimate good. So that's a thought.
Hi. I just wanted to press a point that was brought up in your response to the comments. And so it's a question for both of you, see what's wrong with the argument, I think. So the conclusion C star